Hi everybody, I am here again with another video to talk about preparing to write for chapter 3 of your dissertation. This is the first of a series that I'll do on parts of chapter 3. This one is really about what you can do to get ready to write and all of the reference materials that you should have on hand that will help you as you go through chapter 3. So let's start with gathering other dissertations that you can reference. The first thing that you want to do is look up other dissertations that use the same design that you're using. If you're doing a correlational predictive study, causal comparative, I think they're changing that to a comparative study now. Go in and search those terms in the database to see if there are other dissertations that use that same design. You can reference those, read through how they wrote about the rationale for their design, how they wrote about their data analysis approaches. Different aspects of chapter 3 will be good that you can reference for something that uses the same design as you. You should also look at other dissertations that use the same instrument, or if you're using more than one instrument, you might have to pull a couple of dissertations. This will give you a sense for how they talk about the instrument, how they write about the scoring, how they talk about the reliability and the validity of that instrument. In my case, I had 2 instruments, so I ended up having to pull 2 different dissertations, but it was helpful to see what they included both in chapter 3 as well as in the appendices, so I knew what to include. You want to look up a dissertation that uses a similar sampling strategy. So if you're doing convenience sampling, probability sampling, purposive sampling, you want to look up another dissertation to see how they talked about it and what you may need to consider with your sampling strategy. And last but definitely not least, look for other dissertations that use a similar recruiting approach. So are they recruiting directly from a school or an organization? What did they include for their site authorizations there? Are you recruiting through social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit? Search for those key terms in the dissertations to see who used those, how they wrote about them, what kind of authorizations they included, how they talked about the different social media, how they justified its use. If you're going to use a recruiting service to access your participants, those types of companies like Qualtrics, Prolific, MTurk, and I realize that SurveyMonkey or Momentive is not on here, but they also do that. Look up other dissertations that use those services to see what they included. Site authorization is generally not necessary, but there are other things that you will need to include, like privacy statements and other information. And last but not least, if you are accessing archival data, you want to pull up a study that also used archival data so you can understand what you need to include about that database and that information. Okay, so those are other dissertations that you should search up and keep on hand so that you can reference or at least look at them. Could be one dissertation that has all the same things as you, or it could be 3 or 4 of them that you would need to reference. The next thing that you need to have on hand is information about your survey instruments, okay, or instrument, whichever you have. So make sure that you have the instrument manual on hand. You're going to need to reference this when you build your instrument in, your survey tool, whatever you're going to send it out on, whether it's Momentive or Google Forms or something else, because you'll need to use the participant instructions for that instrument. There's usually 1 or 2 sentences that they have that they want you to use to introduce how to answer the questions. Clearly, you'll need the manual because it will have the instrument questions on them. It will also have how to score the instrument. So if it's a mean score and you need to add up all of the questions and then find the mean, or if some of them are reverse scoring, it will give you all that information that you will end up needing to talk about in chapter 3. Additionally, it will also give you the early validity and reliability data for the instrument that you can reference. So make sure that you have the instrument manual and you reviewed it before you start writing chapter 3. You'll also want to have empirical articles that tested the validity and the reliability of each of the instruments that you are using. So make sure that you pull those articles and that you reference them. This is particularly important if you're using a shorter version of the original instrument. So in my case, the Utrecht Work Engagement Scale was originally a 17-question instrument. I used the 9-question version, so I wanted to make sure that I had empirical articles that talked about the validity and the reliability of the 9-question version. So make sure that you have those on hand as well. You will also want to have empirical articles that use the same version of your instrument as part of their study. So these will come up in your literature review, but you may also want to reference them as you're writing about your instrument in Chapter 3. And then you want to have your site information on hand. So if you're collecting data through an organization, through a school, you want to make sure you've got your site authorizations. You want to make sure you've got information about that organization, if it's website information, newsletter, article, etc. If you're collecting data through a social media site, you want to make sure that you have the names of the groups that you're going to post to. You want to have written authorization from those group administrators. You will need to have privacy statements for each of the social media sites that you use. So if you're using LinkedIn and Facebook, you'll want to make sure you have those privacy statements. And then you want to make sure that you have empirical research that provides justification that this strategy is effective. And if you search in the library for LinkedIn, Facebook, you will find a number of those that come up. Lastly, if you're accessing participants using a service like Qualtrics, Prolific, Amazon MTurk, you generally will not need site authorization, but you will need to have privacy statements. And these privacy statements on social media are really important for IRB and protecting the privacy of your participants. So make sure that you include that information, screenshots, in your appendices. You also will want to include empirical research that provides justification for the use of Qualtrics or Amazon MTurk or Prolific. Just as a side note, Qualtrics, because a lot of GCU students use Qualtrics, they do have a designated rep. So you'll want to, if you're interested in accessing participants through them, reach out to Qualtrics and they will connect you with the rep for GCU. He will send you information that you can include for IRB. So he will have everything that you know he understands GCU processes and procedures. So hopefully that was helpful to you in preparing to get ready to write Chapter 3. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of tools that you can use. I will follow up with a few more videos on how to define your variables and talk through the rest of your Chapter 3, but this should get you started. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks. Bye.